Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're connecting to everyone. It's quite an honor for me to welcome you to Earth Day 2022. What we are about to start is a conversation that is not just about celebratory about Earth Day, but also a conversation that will be supported by three thought leaders that will help me shape a context and agenda and a direction where Earth Day should really take us in terms of the reflections, the insights, and I guess the ambition we want to have as a society as we find ourselves in quite critical times. We do live in watershed moments. We are right now facing enormous pressure on our environmental challenges. We do see now environment generating tons of pressure in terms of the economic cost of this. And we find ourselves partially unprepared for what is ahead of us, at least in terms of whether we have reached a mainstream point where sustainability is becoming embedded. The answer to this question is not yet. And there's a number of reasons why we still are in the propositional side. After, I would say, 2 strong decades of evangelism and campaigning and activism about sustainability, probably made, but there's more that needs to be made if you really want to shift and push the envelope. Earth Day 2022 is an opportunity for us to reflect on the incredibly generosity of our planet, how we live into a quite benign and benevolent system, but how our economic and societal system have been designed fundamentally to transgress the boundary. We often find that we are unable to stay within planetary capacity, and we've been overshooting our limits more and more. That doesn't mean that we have to decrease necessarily just by adapting our lifestyle. It's about rethinking the business modeling, is rethinking the financial systems, is rethinking the way organizations are positioned, and how civic society fundamentally engages in this conversation. This short introduction is fundamentally a way to also introduce the 3 speakers that will help me today in actually bridging more and more and closing the gap. We do have an emphasis, of course, on finance, on HR, on skills, but we also talk about technology and data. So we are preparing a rich conversation that hopefully will be dynamic. And we're also looking forward to your interaction. And the instruction on the website suggests you on how to ask questions on theslido.com. And we look forward to those questions coming through so we can help co-create the agenda of our conversation together with you. Without any further ado, allow me to introduce the 3 speakers that join me today on virtual stage. The first person I'd like to introduce is Christina Romin. Christina, she's the Managing Director of Green and Sustainable Finance Cluster at Germany. For over a decade, Christina was working for Deutsche Börse, where she was originally responsible for the internal and external communication on sustainability issues. She's been around the conversation on sustainability for some time now. Therefore, she has been able to really engage at a deeper level with some of the challenges and equally the opportunity. In 2015, she was head of group sustainability for group-wide management practice of the company. And she also started in 2019 and 21, her service as vice chair of the Sustainable Finance Advisory Board of the German federal government and the German Society of the Club of Rome. So Christina brings a lot of experience to our table. Christina, welcome to the panel. Following the introduction on Christina, I'm pleased to welcome Isabel Garro, who is Sustainability Leadership Manager globally for Acciona. She also teaches at IE Business School in the Master for Competitive Social Transformation and also at the Complutense University of Madrid. Prior to this, Isabel was working as a special advisor to the High Commissioner for the 2030 Agenda in the presidency of the government of Spain. Isabel was, for 14 years, General Director of the Spanish network of the United Nations Global Compact and Senior Executive Advisor for Sustainable Development at Alhambra Communication Agency. Within the UN system, she was at the UN Global Compact Local Networks, member of the UNCG Advisory Councils, and she's been involved into a multilateral conversation around sustainability across her careers. Also, when she started her career, she started with financial auditing at EY. So that creates a wonderful portfolio of experience that Isabel will bring over to our conversation. So welcome to the panel. Isabel, And my third guest in the panel is Peter Plokan, is the Emea Principal Risk Management Advisor for SAS. So Peter is helping organization, institution dealing with the challenges around climate risk, finance and risk regulation, enterprise risk management, risk analytics. His background in finance and in banking really help us to navigate a major challenge that sustainability is trying to ingrain and embed, which is, of course, how do we make sense of the financial opportunities? But his experience in risk management equally exposes him a lot to rethinking the role of data and technology in helping accelerate more and more towards the challenges that we're trying to face. So Peter will complement and bring also quite unique perspective to our conversation. So welcome to our panel, Peter. And finally, if I probably miss of the etiquette, my name is Mark Esposito. I'm an academic. I've been spending my time at Harvard University, University of Cambridge, Arizona State University, Halt International Business School. These are the main institutions where I have served. I equally work as economic advisor for a number of prime minister offices around the world. And I've been at the World Economic Forum. I was advising Martin Schulz in the European Parliament. And I'm currently advising the Prime Minister's office in the UAE. I'm connecting from Dubai, where I am based. In my non-academic life, I am an entrepreneur, and I co-founded 2 companies that are working in the artificial intelligence field and also in the edu-tech field. So that's briefly myself. So I am particularly honored to start this conversation. And the first person I would like to bring on board is Christina. And Christina, I have a question that maybe can really help us set the tone, get the conversation going. And of course, it's a question built on your really wide expertise. So if you had to tell me more about the role that in your career sustainable finance really had, in which way you see this integrated in the nature of the work you're doing, and how you think that this entire conversation we're having this day about finance, ESG, how companies are rethinking their governance. This is a big conversation that I think you've been working on. I'd love for you to actually start sharing some insights, and also it's the initial question that welcomes you officially to the panel. Christina.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the warm welcome and, of course, for your question. First of all, let me say every day must be Earth Day, because it's not a moral question, or it has nothing to do with hugging trees or something like that. But having everyday Earth Day is the only survival strategy we have. Because when the world we are living and doing business in is changing, then we have to adjust our handling of it. That means we have to transform our societal and economical system to deal successfully with challenges like the climate change, like the demographic change, the digitalization, you name it. There are a lot of them. So, and here we can see a kind of paradigm shift in understanding corporate sustainability over the last years, because coming from a more charity-based and unfortunately not seldom from a kind of nice-to-have marketing approach, corporate responsibility got more and more integrated in the strategic thinking of the corporates. And here we came to that labeling of that new data, which is able to measure the corporate responsibility performance of a company, as ESG data. ESG, environmental, social governance data, are key performance indicators which get more and more integrated in investment analysis and decision in the international capital market. And not, once again, because of a moral dimension of it, but because the investors learned that having a holistic view on the value chain of a company gives you the opportunity to forecast the development of a company, to minimize risks, and to get a hand on the possibilities and chances that come along with that transformation. And ESG, and that is really important, has that one central pillar, the social pillar. And here we come to that relationship between the corporates and the employees. Because in the end, your employees are your multiplicators, your ambassadors to the external world, as well as into the internal discussion and the strategic steering of the value chain of the company. And if you are able to provide these informations and how far you get in touch with your employees and how far you are able to oversee your climate risk and how far you are able to steer the governance and the reporting lines and the governance structures in your company, then you give the investors that perfect overview to come to a responsible and successful investment decision. And even if you are in nowadays not maybe, for example, on the 1.5 path already, then you have the opportunity to give that kind of transparency of the points you are struggling with to the investors. And over that classical engagement approach, you can be guided and financed through that transformation and transition that lies before you as company to get to a more sustainable, and that means to a more robust and resilient market position. And that is all about sustainable finance, so to say, using finance strategically to finance the transition in the real economy and giving a kind of holistic overview and providing transparency in how far corporates creating impact. And it was, so to say, just the scope was too narrow in the past when we focused only on that classical financial key figures to steer companies. And I think it was maybe one of the biggest failure of the EU Commission as they first started asking companies to report ESG figures to call them non-financial. Because of course they are non-financial in that moment in that they give you the opportunity to forecast the development of a company. Every kind of material ESG information is financial, and we have to learn about the integration of these new financial data into the classical financial data set. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges for the next years, that we provide comparable standards maybe per sector, to get a kind of grid to that huge amount of ESG data that is in the market at the moment, and to provide a kind of processability for the corporates that have to report these data. Because in the end, there are not 1,000 KPIs relevant per business case, but maybe only 10 material ESG KPIs that has to be identified and has to be measured over time. And so that is all coming along with that taxonomy discussion we are having on EU level, but I think we're coming to this later. So far from my side. Thank you.
Christina, thanks for this, because it really helped us to start having the first discussion among us. And the first person I want to bring into the conversation is Peter. The one thing, Peter, that Christina was saying that immediately raised a flag in my mind, and I guess the same for you, is where is risk in all of this? You know, when we're looking at this from multiple dimensions, the whole conversation about financial, non-financial, the fact that we are so busy in rethinking how do we measure, right? Sometimes we think risk maybe as a secondary dimension, or we don't see this immediately as applicable, but in your line of work, risk is kind of always important, right? It's a factor. Well, what can you share with us in terms of this side of the conversation?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Christina, for the nice introduction. For me personally, the risk side of things is one of the major, or maybe one of the most significant changes that we see in the sustainability arena. I mean, I was involved with CSR activities, dozens of years ago, 10 years ago. It was indeed a nice to have at that time, as Christina also mentioned. But now what we see is that either it's on the financial institution side, but financial institutions are already seeing first losses from changing climate. Examples could be mortgages in Florida with all the increasing hurricanes. You know, it's increasingly difficult to value those houses, the collaterals. Some of them are becoming uninsurable. And so there are a lot of implications from the changing environment that are going to impact the business models of financial institutions. We're talking about sustainable finance, right? So banks are looking at this as we speak. There's a lot of regulations, but I think even more importantly, the non-financial industry. So we have a kind of a healthy mix in the audience today. Some bankers and some also corporates. There is an avalanche of sustainability-related reporting frameworks, whether it's IFRS, whether it's TCFD, whether it is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. The SEC has issued. So there is a increasing attention to the information disclosed, and a big part of this new addition that has to be reported is risks. The corporates, whether it's financial or not financial, have to disclose the climate and ESG risks they are exposed to. And obviously, if you want to do that, you first need to start manage those risks. So I think this is going to be quite a new domain for a lot of, especially non-financial institutions. And thinking also about the audience, the learning and development, the HR. So what does it mean for us? We need to start thinking, how can we assess those risks? Are there any risks for us? I'm from Central Europe region. And so we hosted an event on this, and somebody said, well, we are in the Central Europe. There is no sea levels, there is, the temperature is okay. And there was a head of sustainability division from one bank, and he was like shaking, said, in the region, in the Central Europe, the temperature is increasing twice as fast as the average of the world, right? And then suddenly you can start thinking, what does it mean for my business? If I'm a farmer, what does it mean for my crops? If I'm in a metal industry that requires a lot of water, what does it mean for me, right? So there's a lot of implications on the risk side that we need to start thinking about. And it's not just the changing climate. For a number of industries and jurisdictions or regions, the risk from changing climate is not coming from the climate itself, it's from the actions of the policymakers, so-called transition risk. In the European Union, there are a number of countries discussing that it will be no longer possible to sell non-electric cars. So a car with an engine that is not electric based, you will not be able to sell it and for example, also in their discussion, you can starting from 2030 or 35. So what does it mean for my business model if I'm a manufacturer supplying parts for gasoline-powered cars in the next? So I think this is going to cause a lot of headaches, and it's causing already a lot of headaches to financial institutions who are at the forefront of the regulation. And also thinking about my HR, my training strategy, I need to also start thinking how actually we create this awareness within my institutions, within my management board about the climate risks and ESG-related sustainability risks going forward.
Peter, this is great because I think you're helping us in looking at something that is needed now, but equally something that likely will shape a trend and a trajectory for the years to come. And maybe this also helps me to connect to Isabel in this conversation. Isabel, what really intrigued me about your journey is, of course, your role on the 2030 agendas. Not everyone that we meet has been able to work in agendas in the future. Usually in country like the UAE or in Saudi Arabia, these agendas are quite common, but you did it at the level of the presidency of the government, right? So when you were looking at the work you were doing back then, how much of this factor were really being considered in terms of the impact of sustainability over time, the impact on climate, the impact on risk? So how much of this resonate for the work you were doing when you were in the 2030 agenda with the government?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So I think that was a big step for a government because when I did that work, the truth is that the agenda had been running since 2015. But the hardest part is to really embed that agenda within the government and within every citizen and institution that operates in a specific country. And to be honest, it's really hard to change the way people think that they should do the work. Change minds and adapt to changes is something that we as human beings are not very used to. I just read this morning that in April in 1938, Guy Callender already alerted or warned us that the world had already warmed 0.3 degrees, and the reason why was the amount of CO2 emissions that we were producing. So it's taken us 84 years to understand that is a very serious problem, that it's causing an absolute change of our paradigms of our the way we work, the way we do things. And this is not different for a government. When a government is used to do things in a specific way, to implement a new agenda that tells you that you have to change the way you do things, it's super hard. Said that, I think the COVID crisis has proved very clearly that nowadays we cannot accept business as usual anymore. I think companies that want to make sure that they will survive in the coming years, they have to accept that, as we accepted in 2000s, that digital skills were needed. Nowadays, it's absolutely necessary to make sure that your employees do have these sustainability skills. You would think, well, this is a good thing to know or a nice thing to have, whatever. But as Christina was saying, no, the money is just going to go to those companies that are diminishing risks. And the only way to do that is to really implement controls and processes that adapt to this Agenda 2030. So I think the Agenda 2030 or the 2030 Agenda has only put in place or made more clear and evident the 17 specific challenges that we have ahead of us. And as the Paris Agreement has already said, and as I said, Guy Callender mentioned that 84 years ago, we only have 9 years to go, because nowadays we're in 1.2 degrees over the temperature that we had before. So it's now or never, and I think it's very clear that we have to change our mindsets.
Great. Well, Isabel, since I have you on the line, and I think you really help us in creating a compelling conversation to start here with Christina and her arguments, how Peter was able to integrate the idea of risk and how this at the government level really has become a major driver of the agenda. Staying with you, during our preparatory call, you were sharing fascinating conversation about the changes required at the organizational level for us to make sure that sustainability is becoming more than just, of course, programmatic and something that we would like to achieve. So as we sort of transition in our conversation to, our second focal point and that we are building around the expertise of our panelists. So how do you see these changes currently happening? So tell us more about what you've been noticing, the work you're currently doing, the changes in terms of how companies are not only transforming their CSR activities, but across the transversality of production, right? So back to you then, Isabel.
Thank you. Well, what it's been clear for Acciona, the company that I work for, which is an infrastructure company, but also produces renewable energy, is that the only way to stay in the market in the coming years is going to be to not just implement CSR initiatives, but actually deeply transform the company. That's what we've been doing for the last 15 years. The truth is that we've followed a path that we have called the 3R pathway, which was at the beginning setting a responsibility mindset. So that's making sure that you understand the risks that you have ahead and that you really make commitments to cover or to process those risks. Then the second step will be to adopt a resilient mindset. And to be really resilient, you have to change the whole company. You have to change the processes. You have to change the leadership model. You have to change everything that is within your company. So what we did to do so was recently we changed our bylaws. That's the first step that you have to take. You have to change your bylaws to make sure that your company it's heading towards this new direction that the world is going towards to. The way we did it was change our bylaws. From then, if you change your bylaws and you have responsibility for all the different stakeholders, then you need to make sure that you put that down. I mean, you inform all the stakeholders this is happening, and to do so, you have to change the, as I said, the leadership model. You have to change your codes of conduct. You have to change all the different policies that you have to within the company, and you have to really embed that within the company. And while we were doing that, because this is only paperwork, but then you realize that people, as I said, find it difficult to change. And we realized that the only way to do so was to, and I think Christina and Peter have also already mentioned, was to embed the sustainability department within the financial department. Because as Christina mentioned, we have the book value of the company, but most of the value of our company, it's something that someone has called non-financial, but it's actually really financial. So embedding the financial and sustainability department and merging the Audit Commission and the Sustainability Commission has allowed us to make sure that we cover all the risks that we have. And finally, the last step that we have undertaken last year and that we will be performing for the next until 2025 is to find the new opportunities that you see ahead. It's not only about avoiding risks. It's only to find new competitive advantages for your company to compete in the future in the new world that we're going to be living in. And to do so, we have started to implement our regenerative strategy, which means not only doing no harm. It's so funny that people say, no, do no harm. Sorry, a company, of course, should do no harm. I think a company should provide positive impact in all the different spheres that it operates. So this strategy is going to take us to find these new business opportunities. And I'm pretty sure that it will be the discussions and the trend that will be, covering or being implemented by all the companies in the next future, in the near future. We can't hear you, Mark.
Sorry. I click and unclick. So much of what you said is feeding so many of our ideas, right? From what you said on the positive impact, on something I want to ask Peter later on the net zero. So there's a lot of interesting conversation. But before going there, the one thing that you said that inspired me to go to Christina with one question. Christina, when you were at the Deutsche Börse, you were in charge of internal and external communication on sustainability. And what Isabel said right now is that sometimes communicating at the right level by engaging the right stakeholders is one of the major challenges in getting people on board. So how did you remember those years at the Börse when you were trying to deal with internal, external? How were you navigating the conversation, the engagement, people getting on board with the idea? So what can you share on that? Because I think it's a critical part that also many of our HR professionals who are viewing us might ask themselves the question, how do we communicate this in a successful way? So what can you share with us?
Yeah, thank you. I think these first years at Deutsche Börse Group were and so far really challenging, as you have to answer a central question when you communicate something. What do you want to communicate, and to whom? Who's interested in? And so I think before you start to communicate your corporate responsibility or sustainability strategy, you must first go through, and that was unfortunately then was my second step at Deutsche Börse Group, as I took over the responsibility for the head of group sustainability unit. First of all, you have to go through a kind of materiality analysis. That is what Isabel already said. You have to talk to all your relevant internal and external stakeholders and get a kind of idea on how the expectation look like. So is it really material for a company in the financial sector to report the energy invoice year by year, or is it maybe more material to report the steps you are going to provide, I don't know, sustainable service and product portfolio and sustainable infrastructure. So, of course, providing your carbon footprint to your stakeholders will always be an important point in your sustainability reporting. But is it really material? Does the success of your company get impacted through these information? Maybe not. So what is really material? And that depends on the sector your company is based in. So going through that external and internal stakeholder dialogue, and then developing a first set of KPIs of ESG factors. And here you have a lot of voluntary, but also some mandatory standards you can guide by the Global Reporting Initiative, the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosure, TCFD, has been named. And of course, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, if you are a company with more than 500 employees and a listed company. So, and there you get a kind of idea how to report. And then you should go in dialogue with your bank or with your investors to understand in how far they are able to understand the background of your ESG KPIs and how far they think that fits to give them an idea in how far or where do you stand on that transformation journey, and to finance in the right way, in that kind of forward-looking strategy. And that is maybe one important point. That is not because the financial industry wants to put pressure on the real economy, but you have to understand the self-interest of the financial sector, because in the end, banks and investors dealing with other person's money. And so you have to definitely try to avoid stranded assets. And as much as information you get into your investment analysis and decision, then the risk of a stranded asset gets minimized. And that is, of course, the interest of the financial sector. It's also a struggling of survival and competition in our sector. So that goes hand in hand. That's really important to understand. And maybe one point to that regulation discussion. And I think it's that's an old way in discussing sustainability and the role of the state, when we always trying to go to that black and white world, state or market, because there are some strong and old beliefs that the market will do it by itself, putting all the standards, getting a kind of coherent understanding of ESG aspects, etc. As long as I'm watching the market doing that over 10 years, because he's not able to do it alone. A clear regulatory framework that helps us to get the market in the position to do his job or its job, it's very important. And so a clear regulatory framework, and not only a national, but on European, international level, clear standards are very important.
Great. Christina, thanks for, I knew that asking you the question about the internal-external communication would really trigger so many different points, which also is helping me to answer some of the questions that already are coming from our viewers, especially on how to change the culture. And one easy answer to that from an extraction of what you're saying is really has to be a widespread exercise across the organization, involving from the shareholders to the stakeholders to the entire moving mechanism of the company itself, or the group in this case.
And maybe if I can add one point, as it's spreading over the company, absolutely right, and also getting dialogue with external stakeholders, but then implementing responsibility on board level, setting executive board and advisory board targets, implementing sustainability committee within the company that is in a direct report line to the CEO. That was something I have done at Deutsche Börse Group, because in the end, then you get a the kind of awareness, and sustainability gets cool and sexy, and everybody wants to be on board. That's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Christina, as I want to transition to Peter on his contribution, especially around where all of this can conflude towards the net zero. Before doing that, one just I would say parallel quick question, Isabel. Christina was mentioning before about the fact that you really need a regulatory framework. Now, you've been also actually working on what basically would be the taxonomy that is necessary for the guarantee of the framework. Can you make one comment on this? Just briefly, I'll ask you to do an elevator pitch on this so that then we can move over to Peter.
Yeah, very quick. Imagine we build bridges and hospitals and houses and roads. Imagine that road right now, it's going to stay for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And imagine that road that it's been financed by a bank, it's prohibited because it's emitting too much CO2. And in the coming 10 years, the EU says, sorry, we cannot have a building or a bridge or whatever. We cannot have this infrastructure emitting so much CO2. And so that asset right away becomes obsolete. So the reason why we cannot do that, it's because we will put that pressure into banks. The way to do that is to align our operations with taxonomy, with the EU taxonomy, and that's the reason why we have aligned our operations 93% with the taxonomy. I mean, we cannot leave this pressure in banks.
Absolutely. That gives me then the opportunity to spend some time with Peter now. Peter, I'll ask you for a couple of things. First is your reaction, especially around the idea on the net zero, just to help us cast some light on this. And then I'd like to keep you on the spotlight a little bit to help me move into the third focal question. As you already see, the questions are coming. Our viewers, they want to engage with us more and more on more even relevant topics. So let's try to maybe cover the macro conversation with the time we're going to spend together. So first to you, Peter, where is this net zero conversation going? And what we heard from Christina, what we heard from Isabel, how do you see this eventually playing a role, or is it a role at all in the first place?
Oh boy, a lot of interesting comments, remarks that we could spend half a day. So really just to kind of touch and maybe make it very concrete. We heard about transformation of our businesses. It's not longer sufficient just to say we do not any harm. But what is it concrete? And I think a great example of that, especially in financial industry, as we see it, is the whole drive around net zero. Net zero carbon emission, but not a net zero discussion from 10 years ago where we were thinking, should we actually install solar panels on our offices, or should we use paper cups or instead of plastic cups for our coffee machines? That's a discussion from 10 years ago for most of the advanced economies. The discussion is now about, with the activities and services and products that we offer, we are impacting environment around us. That also exposes us to risks, but we are also enabling and have some carbon footprint involved in our. This is called so-called Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions, which are not direct about our own operations, but it's related to the emissions resulting from our either supply chain or our product and services. So, very concretely, we have, at the moment, we have around 350 financial institutions globally that have joined the Global Net Zero or Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which groups companies that have committed to fully decarbonize their financial portfolios by 2050. What does it mean? If I, as a bank, give now a loan to Shell, I hope we don't have anybody from Shell on the call. If we give a 100 million euro loan to Shell, and Shell has a carbon footprint of 10 gigatons of CO2, I, as a financial institution, with this 100 million euro piece, I'm becoming partially responsible for carbon footprint of Shell. I am enabling it, right? So there are means now how we can calculate the other respective piece of the carbon footprint from Shell, and I am, as a bank, responsible for it. That's what we mean. That's portfolio carbon footprint. Banks have to calculate it, have to report it now, and increasingly so, are committing themselves to fully decarbonize it by 2050 and take aggressive cuts by 2030 and 25 already. So that means that banks and investors will start to say no to number of companies because of the carbon footprint involved with finances. So that's making it very concrete on the topics on that Isabel and Christina mentioned. And for non-financial industry, this is maybe even more operational task, because if we have to change our operating model, if I'm producing, if I'm a manufacturer, to decrease my carbon footprint to get to net zero, it's quite a different task, but also quite a sophisticated task. In one survey, I read that there was a survey, and a large chunk of CEOs of non-financial corporates said the net zero project will be the most expensive project for my company ever taken. And on the other hand, there were 61% of investors said, I'm not going to invest into a company that doesn't have a net zero plan. This is very concrete. Michelle, what does it mean for the industry? So I will stop here, because there are also a lot of other topics that we want to explore.
Thanks for this, Peter. I appreciate how you were able to really bring it over to the practical side. And I will take advantage of you being now with your microphone on to actually take you to the next conversation. One of the things that I guess is really creating a lot of conversation and pressure, and there was a question from the chat that I find particularly interesting on the new skills, right, is how much technology is equally playing a role in all of this. And I think you dedicate yourself now to a lot of different things, such as risk analytics, data. So clearly a conversation on data and analytics around all of the things we're talking about is not only a secondary conversation, it's becoming almost a primary one. Where do you see this going? How important is data? How important is to having, for companies that are not technology companies, a data strategy when they're trying to deal with this rethinking of sustainable finance? And if I may use your expertise, Peter, how do you think is this shaping skills in organizations as well? So okay. your thoughts on this will be really appreciated.
Thank you, Mark. So I over the last 2 or 3 years, I've been talking to a number of financial institutions and non-financial on climate. But there's one quote that I love, that I like the most, that I have collected, and it's this one: climate change is going to be greatest big data project for my bank. This is coming from head of climate program of a top 3 global bank. I mean, one of the biggest financial institutions. And it's about understanding. So the Shell example that I mentioned, for a financial institution, this means I need to understand much more details and information about all the companies that I'm financing, such as Shell. I want to understand where the carbon footprint is coming from. Where are the risks? I mentioned climate change risks. So I want to understand, how is the business model exposed to new risks? Is Shell operating in some waters where there are increased change of hurricanes? Maybe not now, but 10 years from now on. Or is the company engaged in activities that might become obsolete because of the policy making? Right? I had the example with the company, the car. So there's a lot of information that needs to be collected by financial institutions about the customers, but also for non-financial institutions, we need to understand our supply chain better. We need to understand the impact of our products better. Right? So for the financial industry, this will require much more data, much more analytics, new models, and a lot of simulations going forward. And I think that applies also for the non-financial industry. We just need to get better at predicting or getting a better view on how the future is going to look like. What are the potential outcomes, scenario paths? And COVID and geopolitical crisis are just great examples how these are very valid, also not just for sustainability. So I see definitely a lot of drive to get better in how do we collect data, how do we manage it, how do we make sense out of it, and how do we actually take decisions, which include also more forward-looking decisions, right? So that's on the financial industry side. And for the non-financial, there's also another very interesting development. And that's the whole avalanche of these regulatory reporting, let's say, disclosures. So there is a lot of information that the non-financial corporate will have to collect, process, and disclose, and maybe not often immediately. All this will have to be audited. So, I mean, just think of what you need to do with your annual accounts to get them audited. So that will require also, so all that we do, and for example, in the let's say not less, but not as such advanced markets when it comes to sustainability, let's say outside of Europe, for example, my colleagues in Middle East, we are having a lot of discussions with exactly on this. How can we help non-financial corporates to get those disclosure information in a most efficient way? You don't want to think of just collecting energy bills for your 100 factories that you have scattered across the globe in order to collect the simple information, what is our energy cost and what type of energy and etc. Right? So there is a lot of information, often unstructured, that we need to collect. So to get to the core of your question, when thinking about skills, of course, depending on which industry I operate in, for most of the industries, the need for do much more with data and get a better view on financial planning, budgeting strategy, simulations, that will require more analytical mindset, if you will. So investing in getting people up to speed on data analytics, maybe thinking also of new ways how my teams could work, but there's this concept of citizen data scientist, that you don't need to have a PhD to actually work with your data. So that's one aspect of things. The second thing is we also need to work on spreading awareness. What are the risks for us, for my company? So for example, I have been delivering climate risk trainings for a number of institutions globally, and there is a huge demand for people to get up to speed on this, because it's not immediately obvious, right? And the third area of skills will be very specific for your industry. If you are a manufacturer, of course, you need to get into what is it that I need to transform my business model into net zero. And maybe you will need completely new area of expertise to bring on board. But I would conclude with a quote from a regulator that I, again, very like to use, is we simply do not have a choice. Right? The regulators are just taking what policymakers are telling them to do, and then they are cascading it down to financial institutions, and they are also cascading it down to the individual corporates, non-financial corporates. We simply don't have a choice.
That's great.
That would be all for mine.
I have to say thank you for this, because of course he gave us a perfect landing space for the last few minutes we had together in addressing some of the question. Although what I really appreciate is that a little bit of the question on change in the culture came when Christina was speaking before, when we were talking about rethinking data strategy and the kind of skills around it. We have gone in the direction of the skills, as well as how do we assess risk, regardless that is about circular economy or CSR, which was also in the question. But there was a question about how Acciona, in this case, Isabel, therefore I'll go to you, was able to really make this work. And I know that there's a number of different skills that you've been able to really push forward that might also answer a question about how do you really, how do you deal with pushback? So what do you have to say in terms of the number of skills that you have developed that can really become almost like a leeway from the conversation that Peter made with us?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, and the question was asking, and it's very interesting, are they soft skills? Are they hard skills? And I think I would start with soft skills first, because we have divided those in two paths. One is the self-leadership skills, and the other is like collaborative skills, because it's very obvious that we're not going to solve all the problems that we have ahead without setting collaboration with all the stakeholders. So I'm gonna read them. In terms of self-leadership, we need the new skills are adaptive nature, systemic view. we are so used to these reductionist approaches, and now it's pretty obvious that we're working within a system. We need to have this systemic view of what's going on. No longer working in silos is going to be permitted. Critical thinking, creative thinking, and constant learning attitude. That would be your self skills, the skills that a worker needs to have for him or herself. And then we have collaborative skills that we have defined, which, for example, one very interesting is embraceable variability. Because after the COVID example, we have to realize that the world is no longer so predictable anymore. And you have to be able and ready to embrace this uncertainty and feel vulnerable, but still be able to keep walking and keep producing and keep providing value to your organization. Then, of course, radical transparency. We have to be very clear. Greenwashing and sustainability is no longer something that can happen if a company wants to survive in the near future. Then we have to provide room for discussion, because when the arena is not clear, you have to just talk to all your stakeholders to make sure that you create as much value as possible. This regenerative approach, a must is to have this participatory approach. Then the need to empower people and transfer confidence. From there, you would move to hard skills. And Peter has mentioned many. You need to know now how to measure everything, how to measure impacts in society, social impacts, environmental impacts, how to decarbonize, many things that nowadays most of workers don't know how to do. You have to understand, if you produce a phone, what is the impact, I can't recall the name in English, but the impact of your phone in terms of social and environmental terms. So I would think that it's going to be a fascinating era for human resources professionals and learning and development experts, because I think we have a whole new world to develop ahead.
Great, thanks for this. And to expand it even more, I think there is a clear need for our viewers to get exposed more and more to the thinking around the skills, because they equally are going to change fundamentally the way organizations look like, right? From what Peter told us before about how strategy will finally redefine the skill set we're looking for, to what you've been able to contribute, Isabel. To now, Christina, question to you is, you operate now inside of the cluster, which of course is a unique formation, a unique way of looking at different kind of organization entities. So you have a bit of a macro view. You are operating in Germany, so it's a country that has a strong historical dependency on infrastructure, logistic, engineering. How do you see this now adapted, considering that your focus is green and sustainable finance, to the skills?
I think all relevant skills has already been named by Isabel and Peter, and I think it's really focusing on connected thinking, integrated thinking, holistic thinking, teamwork, openness towards new technologies and new ways to do our business. And here I think the attitude behind is absolutely important if we will implement these skills successfully. And we can go through that by thinking, okay, we do not have any chance because the regulator wants it, or otherwise we're going to die because the climate change will win. That's one potential attitude, and I think that's not the best. And I think there's another way to deal with that, and seeing opportunities in that transformation, thinking about that transition path as chance, and thinking about the potential that lies within that journey we are already in. And I think that kind of narrative is unfortunately much too selden in these days, because in the end, we are not doing that for regulators. We are not doing that for market competitiveness in a short way, of course, but thinking on a mid to long-term view, thinking about providing an earth that for the future generation, for maybe being successful in fighting climate change. that would be so great. That would be kind of general or fundamental change in our self-awareness and in our team awareness as global team. And I think the attitude is still much too hesitating, is still too much characterized by fear and unsureness. And in the end, it is not the question of yes or no. We have to go through that. And we are already in it. So now let's make the best of it. And I think that's one important, that's really important point coming from a human resources perspective, because you need that cultural change and you need to set up that kind of attitude in your company. Because in the end, maybe it's going to be fun. We will develop a lot of new business opportunities. We will discover many new ways to do business within the planetary boundaries. And like Isabel said, creating really positive impact, redefining value and growth, all these super interesting topics. And I think it's important that we give our employees the chance to discover the opportunities of that transformation with a positive spirit.
Thanks for this, Christina. Really, really useful contribution on that. And to expand this even more and serving the need of these conversational skills, which is important, often really not yet fully centered around the real opportunities. There's one thing that, Peter, you said before that got my attention. You said the number of training you're running on climate risk. So I'm also wondering, so if you have a whole idea about risk on climate, do you equally have opportunity at the skills level around climate in general? So how do you see this? Because clearly, this is not only an opportunity for training, it's also an opportunity for reskilling, upskilling, whatever is the skilling part of the verb you want to use. So what comes to your mind, Peter?
Thanks. I really like some of the observations before that, this can be fun. And I think in the end, what will the whole changes that we are going to face, how it is going to impact your organization, and what will define the amount of work you need to do is the combination of the culture and strategy that we adopt towards climate change. Is this purely a regulatory exercise? So I need only to produce those reports and I don't care. Is this maybe something more? Is it about I want to protect my business, the risk side of things, right? And that is getting a lot of attention, especially for risk managers because of compliance reasons and etc. So that is driving the demand for training. But taking it one step ahead, not only focus on the risk, what is it that we can gain from this besides protecting our business? And that's the opportunity side of things. And we had at one webinar a head of climate program of one of the leading European banks who said climate change is the greatest opportunity for our bank in this decade or maybe ever, right? So it's a mindset that we adopt, and that will define also how much effort we need to actually spend to get there, including trainings, etc. So there are definitely opportunities. And also the leading framework such as TCFD is asking to disclose not just climate risk, but also opportunities. And so going forward to explore those opportunities, that would require quite some effort, right? So being able to understand where the market is going, what is the customer sentiment? If I bring in a new product like this, can I understand what the impact would be, right? So that would require to tap on those opportunities, which are clearly there, would require some additional efforts and steps that we need to take. And for that, there are no, I haven't seen yet full-fledged trainings yet how to get you there. But I think being able to understand your risks is a good start to start thinking about where your opportunities are.
Peter, thanks for this. I really think that there is so much food for thought coming from our panel and our conversation today. I think 1 hour is almost an injustice to the many conversations we could have. There's one question that I would like to address, and that I realize we kind of let go for the final one, but I know Isabel will help me with this. So it's the question that was coming from our audience about the growth. How do we really think fundamentally a philosophy tenets of growth in general? So Isabel, I think you have something to share in this that can really help us in understanding how this question can be addressed by sustainable finance. And because we have 2 minutes left before the end of our panel, can I ask you for this to be another elevator pitch?
Yes. So we have redefined the concept of growth in our company. The reason is because we expect a 20% increase in sales in our company, but we have told our employees, sure, you have to do that, but diminishing the amount of CO2 emissions at the same time. So it's not only growth in terms of money anymore. It's growth, but making sure that impact diminishes, or at least it's positive. What do you do to do so? We have set a new compensation framework for our workers. So yes, if you reach the goals in terms of sales, in terms of revenue, fantastic, you get money. But if you do so by increasing the amount of CO2, you don't get the money. So what has resulted? People are crazy finding new ways to make the goal. And that's the only way forward. And as Christine and Peter said, it's challenging, but it's super fun.
Well, I have a minute left before the end of our panel, and I'll try my best to provide us with a bit of a summary, although it will never do justice to the amount of information you share with us, but love to share my learning from Christina, from Isabel, and from Peter. I think we are currently not only in a watershed moment, but we're equally in an opportunity moments for business to really take it to the next level, embedding more and more sustainability as part of their value chain and value proposition, rethinking their strategies, making sure that we're no longer looking this as a lip service, but much more integrated into the core of what organizations do at any level. It can be NGOs, it can be for-profit, it can be government. I think we are now speaking a common denominator language across the different lenses. What we're learning is that finance is critical to make sure this is getting serious and getting to the next level, rethinking how do we calculate value, how much do we define economic indicator versus non-economic indicator in a way that is no longer creating just tension, but is creating positive constructive models. Rethinking our entire concept of impact that we can really measure, and resorting to technology for what technology is fundamentally designed to do, is a collective design that is meant to augment humans. And if we have a challenge with the climate, we should use technology to try to address these challenges. All of this was possible because of the skills that we see rising more and more in our field of works, because of the people that are currently taking the gray areas and shaping them into what will become most likely the future of tomorrow. And I want to thank each one of you for having helped me not only understand more and more this, but also for having helped closing the bridge to our viewers on where on Earth Day we think that business, public society, and not-for-profit really needs to actually move forward. So in closing the works, thank you, Christina, for joining us today and sharing your insight with us. Thank you, Isabel, for having been bringing us so many different insights and learning points. And thank you, Peter, for what you share with us, your pragmatism, and the fact that you really took us at a deep level of understanding in many of the things that make your life busy every day. It's been a privilege to moderate this panel. I hope that the viewers enjoyed as much as I did being on this side of the conversation. And I think to all of us, we should celebrate Earth Day in the best possible way. From Mark Esposito, all the best. Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.